The room was already loud before anything even started. Chairs scraped across the floor as people moved around, voices overlapping, laughter rising and falling in waves. It was meant to be a relaxed evening, nothing formal, nothing serious. Just a gathering where people came to eat, talk, and forget about their long days. In one corner of the room sat a piano, old but polished, its surface reflecting the warm lights above. Most people barely noticed it. To them, it was just another piece of furniture. She stood near the back of the room, holding a paper cup with both hands. She wasn't hiding, but she wasn't trying to be seen either. She listened more than she spoke, smiling politely when someone looked her way. She had always been like that, present, but quiet, comfortable watching others take the center without feeling the need to step into it herself. Someone nearby pointed at the piano and laughed. "I forgot this thing was even here," they said. Another voice chimed in, joking about how nobody knew how to play it anyway. A few people laughed louder than necessary. It was harmless talk, the kind that fills space when people don't know what else to say. Then someone glanced in her direction. "Didn't you say she used to play?" the person asked, half serious, half teasing. The words floated through the noise and landed heavier than they should have. She felt her shoulders tighten. Her grip on the cup grew firmer. She looked down, hoping the moment would pass like so many others before it. She had learned long ago that if she stayed quiet, attention usually moved on. But this time, it didn't. "Oh really?" another voice said. "Then she should play something." A laugh followed. Someone clapped their hands once, like it was a joke already agreed upon. She shook her head slightly, not even looking up. "No," she said softly, almost lost in the noise. "It's been a long time." Her answer only seemed to encourage them. "Come on," someone said. "Just a little. It'll be funny." Funny, the word echoed in her mind. She forced a small smile, the kind people give when they want to be polite without agreeing. Her heart began to beat faster, not from fear exactly, but from something familiar she hadn't felt in years. The piano was no longer just a piano to her. It was memory. It was sound and silence. It was long evenings and tired hands. It was pressure and praise mixed together until they became hard to separate. She had spent years trying to leave all of that behind, but the room didn't know that. "Don't be shy," someone else said. "We're all friends here." She shifted her weight from one foot to the other. Her smile faded just a little. She could feel eyes turning toward her now, curiosity spreading. The room that had felt wide and busy suddenly felt smaller. She thought about making an excuse. She could say she wasn't feeling well. She could laugh it off. She could walk away. All of those options sat in her mind, but none of them felt right. Leaving would draw more attention. Refusing again might make things awkward. The truth was, she didn't want to play. Not here. Not like this. The piano had once been important to her, but that was a different life. Back then, music had rules. It had expectations. Every mistake mattered. Every note had to be perfect. Over time, the joy had slowly turned into weight, and one day, she had simply stopped. Most people assumed that meant she had forgotten how to play. Someone tapped the piano lightly, producing a dull sound. "It's not even tuned," they joked. "What's the worst that could happen?" More laughter followed. She could feel her face growing warm. She took a slow breath and looked up. The piano sat there quietly, waiting. It didn't demand anything. It didn't laugh. It just existed. "I really don't think that's a good idea," she said, a bit louder this time. Her voice was calm, but there was something firm underneath it. A brief pause followed. Then someone shrugged. All right, they said. "We were just kidding." Relief washed over her, gentle and short-lived. She relaxed her shoulders and took a small sip from her cup. The conversation shifted, and for a moment, she thought it was over. But moments like that rarely end so cleanly. A few minutes later, someone else brought it up again, this time louder. "No, seriously," they said. "If she really used to play, we should hear it." This time, more people were listening. She felt trapped between politeness and discomfort. Saying no again would make her seem difficult. Saying yes would open a door she had worked hard to keep closed. She wondered why people didn't notice how uncomfortable she was. Or maybe they did, and they just didn't care. The idea that this was all a joke made it worse. She wasn't being asked because anyone believed in her. She was being pushed because they expected something awkward, something to laugh at. Her fingers twitched slightly, a habit she thought she had lost. She pressed them against the side of her cup to steady them. "I'm really out of practice," she said carefully. "You'll be disappointed." "That's okay," someone replied quickly. "We're not expecting anything amazing." The words were meant to reassure, but they landed like a quiet insult. She nodded once, more to herself than to anyone else. The room buzzed with anticipation now. Someone pulled a chair away from the piano bench. Another person cleared space around it, like they were setting up a small stage. The whole thing moved faster than she could control. She took a step forward, then stopped. Her heart pounded louder in her ears. She wondered when a simple gathering had turned into this moment. She remembered being much younger, feet barely reaching the floor, sitting at a piano that felt too big for her. She remembered hands guiding hers, voices correcting her, telling her to try again. She remembered applause that felt empty and silence that felt heavy. This piano was different, but the feeling was the same. Someone gestured toward the bench. "Go on," they said, smiling. "Show us." She looked around the room one more time. Faces blurred together, some excited, some amused, some simply curious. No one looked unkind, but no one looked like they truly understood either. She placed the empty cup on a nearby table. The sound it made felt too loud. She wiped her hands on her pants without thinking, a small, nervous motion. As she walked toward the piano, the noise in the room slowly softened. Not silent yet, but quieter, like people were waiting to see how bad it would be. She stopped just before the bench. For a brief second, she considered turning back. Then she sat down. The bench felt colder than she expected. The keys were smooth beneath her fingertips, worn from years of use by hands she didn't know. She rested her hands in her lap, not ready to touch them yet. The room watched, and somewhere deep inside her, something old stirred, awake again after a very long sleep. She sat there longer than she meant to. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers slightly curled, as if they remembered something her mind was still trying to avoid. The room was quieter now, but not silent. There were small sounds everywhere, someone shifting in their chair, a soft cough, the low hum of the lights above. All of it felt louder because of the pause. Someone near the back let out a small laugh, not unkind, but impatient. "Any song is fine," they said. "We're not judging." She nodded without looking up. She wished they understood that judging wasn't the problem. The problem was that once she started, she wouldn't be able to pretend anymore. She wouldn't be able to hide behind excuses or time passed. She lifted her hands slowly and placed them above the keys, not touching yet, just hovering. The distance felt heavy. Her breathing became shallow. Then she forced herself to take a deeper breath. The smell of dust and old wood reached her nose. It reminded her of quiet rooms and closed doors. Her mind wandered backward, not by choice. She remembered being told to sit straight. She remembered being corrected again and again. The same small mistake pointed out until it felt bigger than it was. She remembered the pressure of expectations that never quite went away. She had told herself she was done with all of that. Her fingers finally touched the keys. Just barely. The cool surface sent a small shiver through her hands. She pressed one key gently. A single note filled the room, clear and plain. It hung in the air for a moment, then faded. A few people smiled. Someone whispered, "Okay." She almost stopped right there. Instead, she pressed another key, then another. The notes were careful, spaced out, like she was testing the ground before taking a full step. The sound was soft, unsure. It matched how she felt. Her shoulders were tense, her back stiff. She expected laughter. She expected someone to say something joking, but no one did. The room listened. She played a short line, simple and slow. Nothing impressive, just enough to remind herself that she still could. Her thoughts raced. She told herself she could stop anytime. She could stand up, smile, and say that was all she remembered. That would be enough for them, enough for the joke. But her hands didn't stop. They moved again, this time with a bit more purpose. The notes began to connect, forming something familiar. Her fingers found patterns without her having to think about them. Muscle memory, quiet and patient, guided her. She felt it, then a small shift inside her chest. Not joy exactly, but recognition, like meeting an old part of herself she hadn't spoken to in years. Her breathing slowed. Her shoulders dropped just a little. The room grew quieter. Conversations that had been half-started stopped completely. Someone leaned forward. Another person lowered their phone, forgetting to record. She wasn't aware of any of that. Her focus narrowed to the keys beneath her hands. Each one felt familiar, even if the piano itself was not. She adjusted her position on the bench without thinking. Her back straightened, not from instruction, but from habit. The tune grew clearer. It wasn't fast or flashy. It was steady, thoughtful. The kind of melody that asked people to listen rather than react. Her face softened. The tight expression she had worn since sitting down slowly faded. In its place was something calmer, more honest. A mistake slipped and a note pressed slightly too early. Her fingers paused for half a second. In the past, that pause would have meant starting over, or stopping completely. Now, she corrected it and moved on. No one laughed. That surprised her more than anything else. She continued, letting the music flow forward. Each note pulled the next one along. The room seemed to shrink again, but this time it didn't feel threatening. It felt contained, safe. She remembered why she had once loved playing. Not for applause or approval, but for moments like this. Moments where time slowed and nothing else mattered. Her hands moved with more confidence now. The sound grew fuller, richer. It filled the room in a way conversation never could. She could sense the change around her without looking up. The energy was different. What had started as a joke was quietly turning into something else. Someone near the front held their breath without realizing it. Another person sat perfectly still, afraid to break the moment. She didn't see their faces, but she felt their attention. Her thoughts drifted again, this time not to pressure, but to release. To the nights she used to practice alone, playing the same piece over and over until it felt like part of her. To the comfort of knowing exactly where her fingers needed to go. The piano responded to her touch, imperfect but willing. Some keys sounded brighter than others. She adjusted, listening closely, adapting as she went. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't trying to prove anything. She was just playing. The melody grew a little stronger, a little deeper. It carried emotion she hadn't planned to share. Longing, maybe, or relief, or both. She realized she was no longer aware of the room behind her. The people, the lights, the expectations, they all faded into the background. There was only the piano and the sound it made. Her fingers moved faster now, not rushed, but certain. Each phrase ended where it was meant to. Each pause felt intentional. The joke had completely disappeared. By the time she reached the middle of the piece, the room was silent. Not the awkward silence from before, but the kind that comes when people don't want to miss a single note. She felt a quiet strength settle into her hands. The doubt that had followed her to the bench loosened its grip. For the first time that evening, she wasn't playing because she was forced. She was playing because she wanted to. The music kept moving forward, and with it, something inside her opened wider. Her hands no longer hesitated. They traveled across the keys with quiet confidence, rising and falling like they remembered the path all along. The piano, though slightly out of tune, carried the sound faithfully. It didn't need to be perfect. Neither did she. People in the room had stopped shifting in their seats. No one whispered now. Even the smallest sounds seemed to disappear, as if the space itself was listening. What had started as curiosity had turned into focus, and then into respect. She felt the change without lifting her eyes. There was a weight to the silence, but it was gentle. It held her instead of pressing down on her. Her fingers slowed briefly, shaping a softer section of the piece. The notes fell like careful steps, one after another. The sound was tender, almost fragile. It carried something personal, something she rarely shared. Her thoughts drifted again, but this time they didn't pull her away. They moved alongside the music. She remembered long afternoons when she practiced alone, the sunlight shifting across the floor as hours passed. She remembered how music once felt like a place she could hide, a place where words were not required. She had forgotten that feeling. A breath caught in her chest, but she didn't stop. She let the emotion sit there, letting it shape the way her hands pressed the keys. The piano answered with warmth. Somewhere behind her, someone leaned back slowly, like they were afraid any sudden movement would break the moment. Another person lowered their head, eyes closed, listening. The music grew fuller again, not loud, but sure. Each note landed with purpose. Her posture was different now, her back straight, her shoulders relaxed. This was not the body language of someone being forced into a joke. This was someone who belonged where she was. Her hands reached a familiar passage, one she hadn't played in years. Her heart skipped for a moment, but her fingers didn't falter. They knew what to do. The memory lived in them, untouched by time. She felt a quiet sense of relief. Proof, not for anyone else, but for herself. The room felt warmer. The air felt thicker, charged with attention. People who had expected something awkward now watched with wide eyes. Some looked confused, as if they were trying to match this performance with the version of her they thought they knew. She had always been quiet. She had always stepped back. But the music told a different story. Her playing carried strength now, mixed with control. The melody rose, then settled, then rose again. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't dramatic. It was honest. She made another small mistake, barely noticeable. She adjusted without stopping, without panic. Years ago, that single slip would have ruined everything for her. Now, it was just part of the sound. She realized something in that moment. She was no longer afraid of being imperfect. That thought stayed with her as she continued. It softened her touch, freed her timing. She played not as someone trying to prove worth, but as someone sharing a moment. A faint smile touched her lips, so slight that most people didn't notice. But it was there. The middle of the piece passed, flowing into something deeper. The notes grew slower, heavier. They carried reflection, perhaps even regret. She didn't label the feeling. She didn't need to. Her chest rose and fell with the rhythm. Her breathing matched the phrasing of the music. She wasn't thinking ahead anymore. She was fully inside the present moment. Someone near the edge of the room felt their throat tighten. They didn't know why. The music had found something familiar inside them, even if they couldn't explain it. Another person wiped their eyes quickly, hoping no one noticed. She remained unaware of all of it. To her, there was only sound and motion. Press, release, rise, fall. Silence between notes that mattered just as much as the notes themselves. The piano bench creaked slightly as she shifted her weight. The sound blended into the music, unnoticed. Her hands moved toward a section that required more control. The notes were closer together now, demanding precision. She met them calmly, letting her fingers glide instead of strike. The piano responded with a gentle brightness, like it was waking up with her. The room seemed to lean in as one. This was no longer entertainment. It was connection. She felt something loosen in her chest, something she had been carrying for years without realizing how heavy it was. Each note felt like a release, like setting something down. She remembered why she stopped playing. The pressure, the constant feeling of being measured, of never being enough. None of that existed here. There were no judges, no expectations, just listeners. Her hand slowed again, shaping the music carefully as it moved closer to its final section. She felt a quiet ache behind her eyes, but she blinked it away. She didn't want to break the flow. The melody softened, then deepened, like a final thought being carefully chosen. She could sense that the room knew something important was happening. People held still, aware that whatever came next mattered. Her fingers pressed into the keys with confidence, not force. Each note rang clear. Time felt stretched. The outside world faded completely. She was not thinking about applause. She wasn't thinking about what anyone would say. She was thinking about how it felt to be here, now, without fear. As the piece moved toward its ending, the music became quieter, not weaker, but gentler, like a conversation lowering its voice at the most meaningful part. Her hands slowed, spacing the notes further apart. Each one lingered in the air before fading. The room remained silent, completely still. She played the final notes softly, letting them fall naturally, without holding back. The last sound faded, leaving a silence that felt full instead of empty. Her hands hovered above the keys for a moment. Not ready to let go, she took a slow breath, and for the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. The silence after the last note felt heavier than anything before it. It wasn't awkward or empty. It was thick, full, like the room itself was holding its breath. No one moved. No one spoke. Even she stayed still, her hands resting lightly above the keys, as if letting them fall would end something too quickly. Her heart beat slowly now, not racing, not tight, calm, steady. She stared at the piano, at the faint scratches on the surface, at the way the light reflected off the keys. For a moment, she forgot she wasn't alone. Then she became aware of the room again. She could feel eyes on her back, not sharp or playful like before, but quiet and focused. The kind of attention that doesn't ask for anything, the kind that simply witnesses. She lowered her hands into her lap and sat there, unsure of what to do next. Part of her expected laughter to return, someone to clap awkwardly and say something light to break the mood. Another part of her hoped no one would say anything at all. A single breath was released somewhere behind her. Then another. Someone stood up slowly. The chair made a small sound against the floor, but it didn't feel disruptive. It felt natural, like the moment was allowing movement again. Then came the applause. At first, it was soft. One pair of hands, then another, then more, until the sound filled the room. Not loud and wild, but steady and sincere. The kind of applause that doesn't rush. The kind that carries respect. She flinched slightly at the sound, not because she disliked it, but because she hadn't expected it. Her shoulders tensed for just a second, then relaxed. She stood up slowly, turning to face the room. Her face felt warm, but she wasn't embarrassed. If anything, she felt exposed in a way that was strangely peaceful. People looked different now. The smiles she saw weren't teasing. They weren't amused. They were thoughtful. Some looked surprised, others almost unsure of what to say. A few nodded quietly, as if acknowledging something they hadn't seen before. She gave a small nod in return, not a bow, not a performance gesture, just a simple acknowledgement. The applause faded naturally, like a wave pulling back from shore. For a moment, no one spoke. Then someone near the front said softly, "I didn't know." The words weren't meant to explain anything. They were simply honest. Another person added, "That was really something." She smiled gently, unsure how to respond. Compliments had always made her uncomfortable, especially when they followed something personal. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, a quiet habit she had when she didn't know where to put her hands. "It's been a long time," she said. Her voice sounded steady, even to her own ears. A few people nodded, as if that explained everything. Someone laughed lightly, but it wasn't mocking. It was more like relief. "I feel kind of bad now," they admitted. "I thought we were just messing around." She shook her head gently. "It's okay," she said, and she meant it. The tension that had started the evening dissolved completely. Conversations restarted, but they were different now, quieter, slower, more thoughtful. People didn't rush back to their previous groups right away. A few approached her, not crowding, not demanding, just standing nearby, as if waiting to see if she was open to talking. One person said, "You play with a lot of feeling." Another added, "It didn't sound like a joke at all." She smiled again, this time a little more openly. "It wasn't," she said, almost to herself. She stepped away from the piano, giving it one last glance. It no longer felt like a trap or a test. It felt like something that had helped her say what she hadn't been able to put into words. She walked back toward where she had been standing earlier, but it didn't feel like the same place anymore. The room felt warmer now, softer around the edges. Someone handed her a fresh cup. She accepted it with a quiet thank you, noticing that her hands were steady. As conversations continued, she caught fragments of what people were saying. "I didn't expect that at all. She's been sitting there quietly this whole time. That kind of talent doesn't just disappear." She listened without reacting. It felt strange to hear herself spoken about like that, but it didn't make her uncomfortable. It felt distant, like they were talking about a version of her she was just getting to know again. She leaned against the wall and took a slow sip. The noise of the room rose and fell naturally now, no longer sharp or overwhelming. Someone she barely knew approached her and said, "You don't have to answer this, but why did you stop playing?" She considered the question. There was no pressure in it, just curiosity. "I forgot why I started," she said after a moment. The person nodded, understanding more than the words alone explained. Another voice joined in, lighter this time. "I guess that joke didn't land the way we thought." A few people chuckled, not out of embarrassment, but awareness. She smiled. "Sometimes things turn into something else," she said. As the evening went on, the piano remained untouched. No one made jokes about it anymore. It stood quietly in the corner, no longer ignored, but respected. She noticed that people spoke to her differently now, not overly careful, not impressed, just more present, like they were finally listening. She felt lighter than she had in years, not because of the applause, not because of the attention, but because she had faced something she thought she had lost, and found that it was still there, waiting. Later, as the gathering slowly thinned and people began to leave, she passed the piano once more. She stopped, resting her hand lightly on its edge. "Thank you," she whispered, not to the instrument itself, but to the moment. She walked out into the night with a calm she hadn't expected, and behind her, the room felt different than it had before she played. The night air felt cooler when she stepped outside. It wrapped around her gently, like a quiet reminder that the world was still moving. The sounds from inside the building faded behind her as the door closed. Laughter, voices, music, all of it softened until it became a distant hum. She stood there for a moment, not in a rush to leave. The ground beneath her feet felt solid, steady. She took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Something inside her felt settled, like a knot she had carried for years had finally loosened. As she walked, her thoughts drifted back over the evening. The way it started still surprised her. How something meant as a joke had turned into a moment that mattered. How close she had come to refusing, to walking away, to never knowing what would have happened if she stayed. She wasn't angry about it anymore. The teasing, the pressure, the awkwardness, it all felt distant now. What stayed with her was the sound of the piano and the feeling of her hands moving without fear. She reached her car and rested her hand on the door, pausing again. The street was quiet. A few lights glowed softly in the distance. She could still hear the last notes in her mind, fading slowly, like they didn't want to leave just yet. On the drive home, she didn't turn on the radio. She let the silence sit with her. It wasn't empty. It felt full, like a conversation that didn't need words. At a red light, she looked at her hands resting on the steering wheel. They looked the same as always, but she knew better now. They carried more than she had given them credit for: memory, strength, patience. She thought about the years she had spent avoiding pianos, walking past them without looking, changing the subject when music came up, telling herself it was part of her past, something finished. Tonight had gently proved her wrong. When she got home, she kicked off her shoes and turned on a small lamp. The familiar quiet of her space welcomed her back. She set her keys down and sat on the couch, still not quite ready to sleep. Her mind replayed small moments from the room, the way the laughter faded, the silence that followed the last note, the looks on people's faces when they realized the joke was gone. She realized something important. No one had forced her to keep playing. Yes, she had been pushed to sit at the piano. Yes, the moment had started the wrong way. But staying, playing, finishing, that had been her choice. That thought mattered. She went to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water. As she drank, she felt a strange mix of tiredness and energy, the kind that comes after something meaningful, something that asks more from you than you expect. She sat back down and stared at the wall, smiling softly. She didn't suddenly feel like everything in her life was clear or fixed. There were still questions, still doubts, still things she didn't know what to do with. But one thing felt certain. She had been hiding from a part of herself that wasn't gone, just quiet, waiting. Over the next few days, the memory stayed with her, not loudly, not like a story she felt the need to tell everyone. It stayed in small ways. When she passed a music store, she didn't look away. When she heard a piano in a movie, she didn't tense up. When someone asked her what she liked to do, she paused instead of deflecting. She even found herself searching for old recordings one evening, listening to pieces she used to know by heart. Her fingers moved slightly in the air as she listened, tracing notes that still lived inside her. She didn't rush into anything. She didn't make big promises to herself. She simply allowed the door to stay open. One afternoon, she visited a place she hadn't been to in years, a quiet room with a piano that wasn't perfect, but felt familiar. She sat on the bench, just like before, and rested her hands in her lap. This time, there was no audience. No expectations. No joke. She played a few notes, stopped, then played again, slowly, carefully. It felt different now. Lighter. Kinder. She realized that the pressure she once felt hadn't come only from others. Much of it had come from herself, from the belief that if she played, it had to matter, it had to impress, it had to be worth something. Now, it did and single quotes t. Now, it could just be music. She smiled as she played, not because it sounded perfect, but because it felt honest. Back at the gathering, people would remember that night in different ways. Some would remember being surprised. Others would remember feeling moved without knowing why. A few might even remember feeling a little embarrassed. But for her, it would always be the night she stopped running. The night she learned that something once taken from joy can be reclaimed gently. She didn't need applause to keep playing. She didn't need permission. She only needed to listen to the music and to herself. As time went on, the story of that night faded into memory, but the impact stayed. Sometimes, the most powerful moments begin in the wrong way. Sometimes, a joke opens a door no one expected. And sometimes, being pushed into the light reminds you that you were never meant to stay hidden at all.